of Pythagoras. Or they had a few different names, but that was basically the Pythagoreans, or I think it was the name of this school. So Pythagoras is considered the first philosopher, also possibly the first cult leader in history.
That doesn't track.
Yeah.
The first known documented cult leader.
No.
Okay.
So this has a lot of twists and turns and cul-de-sacs of information, right? So everything I'm going to say, take it with a grain of salt, and with a huge grain of salt.
You say that with every story you tell.
No, this one is worse, but yes, as well.
Because this dude lived 3,000 years ago?
About 3,000 years ago. From quotes here, big, massive quotes, 555 to 530-ish. So, which would only put him at, 25 years old when he died. And that's also not true.
Huh.
So they have no dates of his birth or of his death.
Yeah.
They are assuming 555 to 530. And the school started about 550 to 520, which means that he was 5 years old when he started the cult.
So really, we don't know what the hell. We just know this dude lived 2,500, 3,000 years ago, and he was a cult leader. We know that. And he was good at math.
Yeah, let's start. Okay. Let's stick with that. Okay. Let's stick with that. Because everything you said was false. So.
Oh. Okay. He didn't live 2,500.
Yeah. Okay. Let's.
Oh, did he never live?
Okay. Let's go into this because you're.
What?
Oh my God! Did you? Yeah, you just ruined the surprise. So, during this time period, there was no real religion. It was a series of cults.
Right.
Right. So the prevailing cult was the Orphics, or the followers of Orpheus.
Right.
So the followers of Orpheus had a lot of these unusual beliefs at the time. So one, they believed in reincarnation. They also believed in the terrors of Hades.
Well, like if they believed in reincarnation, that goes back to those bone fragments they found in Macedonia that were like live, die, live.
Yes.
That was one of those bone fragments.
Yes, absolutely. So the other thing too was in Macedonia, they found that burial urn when they were digging up the road. Now, this is fascinating, and you should definitely look into this burial urn. It is spectacular. It is a pristine gold burial urn that has the ashes of two people inside of it. And the thinking is that the people would be put in after they died and burned inside of this urn.
Wow.
It's a huge gold urn.
So they must have been super wealthy.
Possibly, yeah. But inside of it, there was papyrus found, and it's the only surviving papyrus from that time.
Of the Orpheus cult.
Of any of that time period. There's not other, because papyrus disintegrates after like 50 years.
Right.
Completely.
And this was surrounded by the ashes of those two humans, and so it survived.
Intact.
Wow,
Yeah.
That's amazing. When did they find that?
I think it was 2014, 2013, around there.
Wow.
I would say. They did the first release. So the papyrus was so badly damaged that they had to use papyrus juice, basically. They kept it in papyrus juice, and they used static electricity to wiggle
that's amazing.
the papyruses apart so that they could do the scans on them individually. And even then, the process damaged a lot of the words and stuff like that. It's what they found was totally incomplete. There's no rhyme or reason to what it's there. And those scrolls are going to be, those papyruses are going to be examined for the next 50 to 100 years. And people try to figure out what it all means.
Right.
And that is part of the problem with trying to backtrack to these cults is that unless that information was written down on a tablet or on gold, which they have found gold writings as well for burials mainly, the information's just kind of lost.
Yeah.
But the one thing we do know is that the Orphic cult was the prevailing cult of the time.
In that region, in that
region
Macedonia
at that time.
And did Pythagoras, where did he live? Was he Macedonian? Was he Greek? Was he?
He's Greek. So
Greek.
So the most scholars would agree that he was from the island of Samos, which is a Greek island, and that's what they know. I mean, that's literally
okay.
And again, anytime that I give anything that seems like information, just put in front of it. Most scholars agree. Or some scholars agree, or a scholar agrees.
At this point in our history, this is what we think.
Yeah.
Because we don't know shit.
Right. So the cult of Pythagoras, they had kind of information about him as well. So that's a lot of our writings come from the information that we know from the cult. So that he traveled to Egypt, and he learned from the pharaohs, and so he learned this ancient Egyptian math and science from the Egyptians.
Interesting. That sounds like Moses.
Yeah, that actually sounds like every single philosopher that has ever existed throughout time.
Yep.
And there's a reason for that.
Yep. And then Moses would fall into that same lore, that same type of trope of they went and learned from the masters.
Exactly.
And where Moses's lore is really interesting is because he was actually part of the ruling family. So he got the best of the best knowledge.
Yes. Yeah. And that makes a lot of sense, right? For Moses' story. So the interesting thing about all of this is that Plato said he was a disciple of Pythagoras. So the idea is that he learned directly under his tutelage. Plato also references, so Plato actually references him in his writing. So it isn't like a theory that like it's a roundabout way. He references Pythagoras a lot. And I'm trying to remember the other, there's a most of the like the Plato or the Platonic learners at that time, the philosophers, all of those and the people that came after him also trace their like
lineage.
Yeah, their educational lineage to Pythagoras as well.
It's the same way that cults do today.
Yes.
They trace their lineage back to Jesus, or like the Mormon Church, they trace their lineage back to Joseph Smith, who traces his lineage back to Jesus. And
yeah, absolutely. And they're all second cousins and third cousins removed and stuff like that. So let's talk about what Pythagoras actually believed. Okay.
Reincarnation?
Well, definitely reincarnation. But a lot of those were, coming from the Orphics of the time. So a lot of the beliefs of the Orphics translated over into the cult of Pythagoras as well. So like, he was a vegetarian. If you joined, you had to have 5 years of silence, learning under Pythagoras himself. No beans. Beans are right out.
Okay.
And it was like a mortal sin to eat beans.
Eat a bean?
Yeah. If you put on your shoes, you had to put on your right foot first. And numbers and math had spiritual meaning. So he has this thing called the music of the spheres. And what it was that the universe, not the universe, our solar system was arranged around music mathematics. That the movement of all of the heavenly bodies were tuned to a kind of music, like this is numerology, like at its core.
Yeah.
And he probably was one of the forefathers of numerology in mathematics and science.
He probably wasn't. He probably was just better at repackaging and branding.
We'll get to that. So he also possibly believed in the heliocentric model for
I have no idea what the hell those were.
Helio is sun centric. Everything goes around the sun.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So
So
instead
he wasn't a flat earther?
no, he definitely wasn't, because he knew that everything was a sphere in the heavenly bodies. So no, he was definitely not a flat earther. I mean, he might have been today, but
That's another cult group we could
oh
look
God,
into.
I don't want to get into that. I'll just get angry.
Oh, they're funny. They are so funny. And they got some cool art.
They actually, the one thing I do want is the flat earthers have how the flat earth works, and it's a clock.
Yeah.
I want that clock.
Yeah,
so
I do
bad. So the other thought that they had too is that there was two suns. So here you had your primary sun, and you had a secondary sun, which you couldn't see.
Your redundant backup sun.
Your redundant backup sun. Yeah, just in case, right? So, yeah, in case you lose power on your first sun.
Yeah.
So what this has to deal with is in Orphics, there is this concept of the like two extremes being in balance of one another. So you had, if it's like a very yin and yang kind of philosophy, which is if there's something that you can see, then there's something that you can't see that is keeping those two things in balance. And it's all based on numbers and sound and harmonics and everything else.
Sounds really complicated.
It is very complicated. And the more you delve into it, the more it makes it less sense it makes. It confuses you.
Are there still people that worship Orpheus? And is there still an Orphic cult today?
Well, okay. So no, but also maybe, because the basis for a lot of these cults still exists in other organizations. The numerology, it's still out there. And so not direct. I've not seen any direct correlation like there is a cult of Pythagoras and a cult of Orpheus. But a lot of what they believed still exists in other groups and organizations and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
sacred symbols and numerology and stuff like that. I mean,
And Dan Brown.
Yeah. This would be like a Dan Brown book.
Yeah.
100%. Let's talk about now. Well, let's continue talking about him, because there's some other information about
Who
him.
are we talking about?
Pythagoras.
Pythagoras.
That guy.
Not Orpheus.
No.
Pythagoras.
Pythagoras. Orpheus is he's just a side note, as far as you have to understand Orpheus to see the cult of Pythagoras.
Okay.
So because Orpheus, the Orphics are, again, they're the prevailing cult at the time.
And
then,
is Orpheus, is he a god or is he a human turned god?
yes,
Okay.
to both.
It depends on what group you're a part of.
Right, because so the story of Orpheus is that he went to Hades to go rescue his girlfriend or wife.
Is that Persephone?
Yes. I believe that is Persephone.
Interesting.
I think so. I'm bad with those names, but
Yeah.
Zeus said, yeah, you can go save her, but you have one rule. You can't look at her after you saved her until until you leave Hades. And you look back at her, and she now spent her eternal time in Hades. Orpheus is very, very interesting because he has died 5 or 6 different ways, depending on who you are. My favorite is that after he loses Persephone to Hades, he says, I'm not going to have sex with women anymore. And the women were so enraged by it, they murdered him. That's my favorite.
Wow.
That was my favorite. I'm just like, damn.
Who's the hottest cult leader today? I don't know. Definitely not Chad Daybell. Oh.
Yeah. Ah, jeez. Why? But and Orpheus gets his head cut off. The head goes rolling down a hill. It lands in the land of Lesbos, where all of the
women are.
Right, but their oracles, all the oracles are, and they keep his head for reasons.
Because he's hot.
Yeah. You don't need the whole body.
John Hamm. John Hamm is my...
Oh my God, but he's not a real cult leader, but if he was, that'd be something you would join.
Yeah. John Hamm is my favorite cult leader.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so...
Prometheus.
No, not Prometheus.
Oh, sorry.
Pythagoras. God, keep on track here. Look, we're only going 20 different locations at the same time. Well, speaking of going different locations at the same time, that was one of his powers.
Oh, he could bilocate?
Or trilocate or quadlocate.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. So people would say that they saw him in many different locations at the same time.
Remember that movie, Multiplicity? They had that same power.
Wasn't a power that cloned him.
Oh. Well, so Pythagoras wasn't cloned. He just could.
Yeah, he just had superpowers.
He has superpower.
He had superpowers. And he also had a golden thigh, too.
What does that mean?
That means that he's divine. He showed it off at a like an outdoor concert. Pretty much. They were at this event and he was like, hey guys, check it out. I got a golden thigh. And everybody's like, ooh, he's divine.
Like, what does that mean?
Apparently that was a symbol of that time of divinity. I'm like, because I read it, I'm just like, okay.
Blessed are the cheese makers.
Blessed are the golden thigh makers.
Like, what? What is happening here?
I mean, if you're going to go that route, you might as well go any other route.
I'm going to go like the next tribute band that plays in our local town center. Walk up, go, look at my golden thigh.
Yeah.
The Bon Jovi tribute band that plays during the summer.
God, yeah. Okay, so apparently also his cult was Fight Club.
Oh, yeah.
Because what's the first rule of Fight Club?
You don't talk about Fight Club.
And the second rule is you don't talk about it either.
So were they actually fighting, or it was just you're not
just
supposed
didn't
to
talk about it. Okay. Yeah.
So a lot of cults have that rule. You don't talk about it. And if you hear about it, and what that does is that creates this sense of ordination.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, you were divinely blessed with understanding because we don't talk about this.
Yeah.
So that means that you had a calling by whatever to join us.
Yeah.
And it creates that sense of specialness.
Yeah. And they had 2 different groups. So they had the there's a term, and it's a rough word. It basically means the listener of Pythagoras, and it's like the Ariotics or something. It's a weird word like that. And then you also had the second group was the mathematics, and each group you basically were if you wanted to enter into the cult, they would challenge you with like critical thinking and how fast you could do the critical thinking, and they would insult you and see how you reacted, and it was basically hazing at a university.
Sounds like synonym, the synonym cult. That's exactly what they would do.
Interesting.
They would get into the circle and they would scream at each other.
What was that term that they used for that?
I don't remember.
Yeah, but you know what I'm talking about. They had a term for
it.
Same here. So they had.
It's so interesting. Like we think we're so evolved, but we are humans, and humans
3,000 years
3,000
ago.
years ago.
We're doing the exact same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because our brains are wired in that same weird ass way.
And I say this every time that we do research, is that I start to do this research, and there's just these common threads that are through everything. I'm still looking for like a group that did something that was like, we did this that is not in the realm of like everything else that we've done, and it worked. You know, people have tried it and it just doesn't go anywhere because it just doesn't work
with human
yeah.
conditioning. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you think of, they all use the same, 3,000 years ago, they were using the same techniques. Modern cult leaders are using the same techniques. CIA is using the same techniques. Yep. The Russian FSB is using the same techniques. So it's just understanding. I think a way to protect yourself is understanding our brains are wired a certain way to respond and to understand that, so that you don't fall in that trap.
It's so the way I kind of put it is like, it's the movie Inception, right? So in the movie Inception, you would build a subconscious barrier, like a protector, and you'd have to go through like this special sort of training for it. And it isn't that you can go, oh, so this is happening, it gets blocked. It's more of, oh, there are signs to look for. And that's what your subconscious picks up on, and that's how you can stop being someone infiltrating your thoughts in Inception, right? It's the same kind of thing as like, if you learn about it long enough, you start to see signs. And also when your gut is telling you, hey, there's something going on here, you might actually listen to it, because if you have that knowledge, instead of just, I have a bad feeling and I don't know why. Yeah.
And it's important for all the different people who are doing exposés on cults. I think we think of, oh, it's like too much, or there's so much content out there. But I feel the more content, the better. The more people are exposed to the way that people are manipulated, or the way that people manipulate that human condition.
Exactly.
It can help protect yourself.
And 3,000 years ago, they knew it. They were doing it. And so it isn't like this is new and this is all new pseudoscience or anything. No, this is, we've known this for millennia. So they had the different groups, and each of the different groups had different ways of being taught. So you had basically like the learners were they were the mathematicas or whatever. And then the other group, they were the listeners. So they couldn't be taught, but they could listen to Pythagoras teach. Right. And they definitely had secret information, 100% secret information. So everything they did was about this secret of Pythagoras.
But is that secret documented anywhere?
No.
Yeah. So
remember, they also had vows of silence too for 5 years. So a lot of them couldn't even talk for 5 years or write it down or anything. Yeah.
So that's how other cults work too, right? We have secret information, but you'll never hear it.
So you had special names for joining the cult. You had secret information that was hidden. You couldn't talk to anybody. These people also did not live in society. They were like, one of the videos I was watching, they called them the hippies of the age. So
they lived in a commune.
They didn't wash. They wore very drab, like it wasn't drab because of the they were going for a style. It was just they lived meekly, like, so all their clothes were just not special clothes. They were just, like burlap sack kind of things, and that was their choice.
Yeah.
They wouldn't talk to people. They would hang out at temples and preach. So they would go to the Orphic temples and preach, and they were generally hated. They actually drove them off of most of the islands, and they had to go to another island and form a commune there to practice their cult there as well. So
they sound really annoying.
they everything that I hear about these people, super, super
Was it all
annoying.
men or was it men and women?
Men and women that I could see. That there's no indication either way. And again, because there's not a lot of firsthand information at the time.
And what were they gaining out of all of that? Was it knowledge or?
No, it was so because of a few things, right? Hades was a real thing, and there was, when you went to Hades, you would be tortured or whatever. So it was
they
kind
were
of this
escaping Hades.
escaping. It wasn't about escaping Hades. It was about what happens in your next life, and it was this becoming this ideal creature as well. What that means, who knows? But that was definitely one of the things that they were trying to attain a higher level of being through music and math
In this life, in preparation to have a better next life.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And so like here's one of the things that I love is like their numbers. So like I remember there was no zero. So it was number 1 was male and order. Number 2 was female. That was chaos. All right. Number 3 was justice, but it was also procreation, because 1 plus 2 equals 3.
Okay.
So that's the kind of number system that they would look at. Like, what do these numbers minus and plus add to mean something? So if you take a male 1 plus 2 female, you get 3. So that's how they would do their things. And it meant a bunch of other
Right.
things as well. But that is the kind of numerology that they were doing. Real groundbreaking stuff here. Okay. So do you have any other questions about Pythagoras and his cult? Because we're now going to move on to the next.
Probably, but go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay.
Move on.
Move on. All right. So let's talk about his theorem. It's all bullshit.
Okay. The stuff that they teach in school?
Yes.
Okay.
So the Pythagoras theorem that we know about was, again, according to historians, around for about 500 years before Pythagoras was even known to be alive.
And what is the theorem?
A squared plus b squared equals c squared.
Okay.
That's it.
So 1 plus 2 equals 3?
No.
Okay. I don't
You're
know math.
terrible at this. Oh my God. Like, well, actually, what was interesting too is that a bunch of 18-year-olds just this year set the first proof for the Pythagorean theorem to be true.
Okay.
So 3,000 years later, a bunch of high school kids formed the first proof.
Nice.
It was amazing. Like,
Yeah.
everybody's going crazy about it.
Yeah.
But I was like, man, that's awesome.
That is cool.
So, I mean, but that's math for you. It takes a long time for real proofs, like, because it was a theorem, which is based, like, we haven't found anything that proves this wrong, but we haven't found anything that proves it 100% right. So it's still considered a theorem.
So it was around 100 years before Pythagoras.
Ish, yeah.
Yes.
Maybe 500 years.
Okay. Okay.
And probably not even from the Greeks. It might have been from Iraq or from China as well. So that theorem, the Pythagorean theorem, is found everywhere, even before.
Okay.
Okay. So the reason I bring this up is because let's talk about what probably really occurred during this time.
Okay.
Okay. Pythagoras never existed.
Right. That's the twist.
Yeah, this is the twist. That Pythagoras is an ideal, and actually he's probably a legendary character. And a legendary character was during this time period in this area of the world was the favorite thing for them to do. So if there was ever an idea that was popular, they would assign a human to fill its place. They needed a human to exist instead of just something being what it is. Orpheus. So
But Orpheus was a god.
maybe. Orpheus probably didn't exist either.
Well, yeah.
But people write about him and what he says and what he does and what he teaches, and people are his kids, and it's like, but Orpheus never existed.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with Pythagoras. So
He was a literary device, is what you're saying.
And Plato, who, as far as anybody can tell, did exist. He was a real person. Again, maybe. Because the more I'm doing research on it, I don't even know if Plato existed. So it was more of this idea that they formed these schools around and would attribute it to this person because it was easier for you to talk about them as a person instead of an idea. I think that the concept of just an idea that is born out of nothing doesn't hold as much as a teaching from a person.
So you could have had one dude that was born in, what was the island?
In Samos in 555, yeah.
So one person that was born in Samos that pulled all these things and started this cult and labeled it Pythagoras.
And it probably wasn't even that. So if you think about it, right? So if your form of writing is on something that only lasts 50 years at best, if it's taken care of. So I watched another video that said that with meticulous care, a papyrus scroll could last 70 years. That is if it is kept sealed in a container, in a building. But these areas were high humidity,
Right.
like weather, storms, earthquakes. I mean, that they didn't last that long. So
It was through word of mouth.
well, not just that, but what you would get is this takes me back to the Library of Alexandria, right? Which is another one of those BS stories that we have in our head because the city of Alexandria wouldn't have been able to sustain those writings for that long, not without thousands of people transcribing 24 hours a day. It's just the numbers don't add up because the only way that they could write on was papyrus scrolls at the time. They didn't have another way of formalizing this information. So the 400 years of Alexandria wouldn't have sustained that information. So you would have only stuck to these scrolls that would have been considered important and not all the information from human history, which is what everybody says.
Right.
It's the same thing here. So you get transcribing if you kept the scrolls going, or word of mouth, like you said. And then what happens when you get word of mouth, you get the telephone game and the information becomes, well.
And then you have the exaggerators that take that information and make it more elaborate, profound, and interesting.
Exactly. So what I find interesting is that this cult seems to come about after Pythagoras, like when he was 5. Like the timing is all wrong, the numbers are all wrong, everything's all wrong about this. I think the cult came first and then the person came later. So the idea was that that you had a group of scholars that were trying to figure out numerology and stuff like that, and they formed this school of Pythagoras who never existed. And a cult was formed out of those teachings of those group of individuals. So I think it was an individual effort. All of his lineage, where he was learned. I mean, he was at one point held by another enemy, and he learned from them, the Magi's. Like everything about him is just stolen from all the other legendary characters that existed at the time.
That's the Toranaga from Shogun.
There you go. Yep.
He learns grand manipulation from being an enemy combatant.
Yeah. And the big thing about this cult is they're the ones who are portraying the information.
Mm-hmm.
So they are the ones doing the marketing.
Right.
And that's where I think the Pythagorean theorem, Pythagoras, everything, I think it was all marketing.
Right.
And that's what you had said at the beginning. It's like a marketing thing. You hit upon all the points. I
knew nothing. I did see the urn that was found in Macedonia recently. But other than this, I don't know math. I don't know any of this. I just know cults.
Yep.
So
yep.
I could see
you saw the writing on the wall.
On the wall, yeah.
So the idea of the Pythagorean theorem, I think, came from the cult of Pythagorean. That was it. Mm-hmm. They were like, yeah.
We invented
That's
it.
our guy.
Yep.
Our guy invented that.
This math, yeah.
Yeah. And then they were like, well, look how it goes in with our numerology and expands into the music and stuff like that. And even the music theory is attributed to Pythagoras. Like the scales of music theory, like, the fourth and fifth chord and, fourth and fifth octaves and stuff like that, are all mathematic based and attributed to Pythagoras. Mm-hmm. Which I still think is all bullshit. I don't think that they were the ones that invented it. I think they just were grabbing all this information and trying to stuff it together, and then they were the best note keepers at the time. Mm-hmm. I think that was it. And the best people of word of mouth, because they were crazy and going to all these different temples and expounding their nonsense.
And learning.
And learning.
Yep.
Yeah. So I will have to say that they were definitely educated people. But 99% of what they said was cray-cray, and 1% was actual information that was legitimate.
Passed down through history.
Right. And then Plato picked it up, and then it kept getting down. And I think what you see in this time period is that, like, Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, all of those people, I think probably most of what they said was nonsense. But each generation after them would kind of weed out the BS and grab the information that actually still holds true. Uh-huh. So it was a sort of roundabout scientific method, because the scientific method didn't exist really at this period. And then just people just would say everything that came to their mind. But each generation after them would be like, well, that doesn't make sense because we see this in nature, we see this with that. And I think it's the same thing with Pythagoras, is that they were like, I'm a student of Pythagoras. Well, do you believe in all this stuff? Well, no, obviously not. That's crazy. Mm-hmm. But hey, that one theory that he had about, a squared plus b squared, it's like, well, he didn't make it up, but well, we attribute it to him anyways.
It's a good name.
It's a good name. There's a lot of other names for that theory as well, depending on what country you go
interesting,
to. Yeah. So there's, like, China has a different name for it, and Iraq and India, they all have different names for the theory based on who was utilizing it for their math at the time.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. So yeah, that's Pythagoras, which is basically, it's whose line is it anyway?
Crazy hippie cult.
Yeah.
From 3,000 years ago.
Yeah. And points don't matter and everything's made up.
Yeah, exactly.
I think this one really, like, set me in a lurch, because when I was in school, like, the teachings that they make these legendary characters seem so important, mm-hmm. and, like, bigger than life and hyper intelligent, and like, you think about, I mean, it's in The Princess Bride. Have you ever heard of Socrates, Aristotle? Morons. And it's true. They kind of were.
They were human.
They were human. Well, maybe they might not have even been human or alive. They probably were schools, mm-hmm. that just taught philosophy. And the Greeks, ancient Greeks, loved putting legendary characters into stories. They would just make up people and make them into these gods and goddesses.
It would be like 3,000 years from now if there was the John Wick theorem.
Yeah. John Wick was this, you know, like he was the ultimate male at the time, and, you know, would defeated his foes, and, you know, he's a warrior of, like, no, he's made up. No, he was real.
Yeah.
Look, we have proof that he existed.
We have his theory.
Yeah. Like, there's
You can
pictures
kill
of him
with a
everywhere.
pencil.
Yeah. Yeah. So absolutely. Well, we still do it today. We still venerate our people in our modern culture that exude power or intelligence and stuff like that. We still have our stands for these people of influence. You know, now it's TikTok and everything else, but it's still the same mentality exists, and we put this false deification on top of these people, and then get shocked that they're human and they make mistakes. It's like, well, you shouldn't have put that much emphasis on this person in the first place, because I can guarantee you everybody has their issues. Everybody. I don't care.
And so does Pythagoras. Pythagoras had his issues.
He had his issues. Yeah.
Because he was a smelly hippie.
Yeah. I mean, and
if he existed.
If he existed. If he existed at all. And I think that should show us, like, we put stock into these people in the past. We shouldn't put stock into people today. You know, that we shouldn't put so much emphasis that these people are brilliant or are, you know, better than anybody else, because they're not. They're just human that have different ideas.
So I think it's the important thing is to think skeptically about everything.
Yep.
To question everything.
Yep. I agree. I 100% agree.
And to not accept point blank. And and this is part of the human condition. It's so much easier to just turn your brain off and accept what you're being told. That's just easy. Yeah. There's no work required. But this, to go back and look at Pythagoras or listen about Pythagoras, it takes work. And a lot of people have put in the work, but I mean, it's not easy.
Yeah. And through all this research, I never found where anybody says we have proof that this existed. And I mean, I went off on other tangents because, you know, I want to be able to talk about, you know, the Orphics at the time and who Orpheus was, and, you know, just even on the cursory, you know, but when you have 5 ways that a person died, it's, well, how can that exist? How is that feasible that this one person died 5 different times, was born in 4 different places, and, you know, like, well, maybe he wasn't real. Maybe this is an idea and not, and because it's easy also, I think, during this time to, instead of saying, I have this thought process and let me tell you everything I believe, it'd be easier just to say, hey, think about Pythagoras. And everybody goes, oh yeah, I got what you're saying. I think that's easier as to spread that message than to have a long list of different ideals. And then when you start thinking of, you assign a large group of ideals to a person, then it becomes easy to deify that contextually, you know, like, we can worship
beans.
that.
Yeah. Don't eat the beans.
Yeah. Don't eat the beans. The beans are bad. That was, man, I tell you, out of everything, that was like a big deal. Vegetarianism, yeah, you know, because you don't want to eat a cow because that could be, you know, reincarnation of, you know, of so-and-so, or like, oh, and there was one story I forgot about, the puppy story. He was walking down the street and he heard a puppy yelping, like I think it was being whipped or something. And he stopped the person. He goes, that is my cousin.
Puppy's like, what?
I don't know who you are, sir, but I'm coming with you now.
Cousins. Yep. Right here. Totally my cousin.
It's like, it's just these great stories.
Yeah.
It really is. And I think that's the important thing to me too, is like, these are just good stories.
Mm-hmm.
And we shouldn't take them more than that.
Yep. Agreed.
Anyways, I'm glad we could talk about that, because he's a funny character. He's a funny character. So thanks, guys. Thanks everybody for listening, and we'll check you next time.
Bye.